You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Cricket Podcast. Today, we're going to be talking about the second test between England and New Zealand coming up at Trent Bridge, starting tomorrow, the 10th of June, or perhaps yesterday, depending on when you get round to listening to this. I always think it's weird that people listen out of sync with when the matches are, but you do you, listener. I'm not going to begin the show by slagging you off too much. I am Jack Hope, happy to make my return to the podcast after a 2-week trip to Sicily. And what an event that was. And I'm joined by Max Rowe-Brown for today's detailed analysis. Max, how are you doing this lunchtime?
Hello. Yeah, I'm all right. I'm suffering from hay fever today, as we were discussing. The grass pollen is out and it's attacking me, so it's not much fun. But yeah, otherwise all good. Looking forward to the cricket, and obviously welcome back after your 2-week injury layoff, or your hot weather training, or however you want to phrase it.
Well, hot weather training to eat 3 plates of pasta a day and drink about 5 beers a night. I've come back in fighting form. I went to the Oval yesterday, had a few beers.
You're looking a little pallid.
Do I what, a little bit yellow?
No.
No, it was good. It was good. I thought that you and Ross did a sterling job holding the fort as well for the IPL. I enjoyed listening to that from afar. And then, as some of our listeners pointed out, having a little break for England's debut test of the summer. I also,
a well-earned one, I might add.
I also want to give, right at the top of the show, a quick shout out to the guy in the airport who recognised me from the podcast. We were snaking through passport control, and he said, "Oh, you're the guy from the Cricket Podcast." And I was like, "Yeah, nice to meet you." But then we didn't have time to, swap details or any of that. It was nice though. 10:30 in the passport queue, back to getting back into the country after being delayed by 36 hours.
We've officially made it. Congratulations.
Whoever you are, reach out. We'll give you like a month's free Patreon subscription or something like that for cheering me up at the end of a long journey. Max, are there any other messages for the listeners? I think we're sponsorless for this episode, aren't we?
I think we are, yes, officially. So we are sponsored by ourselves for this episode. And if you want to sponsor us, get in touch. So just the normal messages at the Cricket Pod on Twitter and Instagram, if you want to get in touch with us over there and follow all the nonsense that we spout along with doing the podcast. And head over to patreon.com/the Cricket Pod to support us there. We've got a couple of Patreon shows coming up that we will be doing now that Jack is back from his little break. So that will be good to get those going, and lots of other benefits as well, the Discord, etc. So all good fun. Is there anything else? I've sort of thrown me off now that we haven't started with the sponsor bit.
Yeah. We've got some other sponsors in the works, haven't we? But yeah, if you do want to sponsor us, we've got a track record of successful. What are we sponsoring? Sponsor it. We're not sponsoring anyone, are we? Of being sponsored.
Being sponsored. Yeah. I don't know.
We should probably,
we should work on that.
When it comes to a real pitch, we need to know that vocabulary.
Yeah. This is why you iron out the creases. It's all good.
Right, Max. We're talking England v New Zealand. England. I mean, I wasn't actually about, was I, for the first test at Lord's. I listened along on different radio streams, a bit of Guerrilla Cricket, a bit of BBC, watched the highlights. But I don't know if I've got what you would say. It's the first England match, I suppose, for a while, but I didn't really watch any of the balls live. And I don't know, therefore, whether I've got a great feeling for how the two sides lined up. I've got some questions for you.
Okay, I was going to say, why don't you tell me what you thought your impressions were, and
I'll
tell you whether I agree or not.
So my impressions were that Lords did a bit of a Lords, and the pitch was dreadful for 2 days. Then it sort of dried out and flattened out, and it probably became kind of okay. Everyone was raving about Matt Potts like he's the second coming, but that it's not unheard of for an English bowler to do quite well in the most English conditions. So I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. Root from afar sounded like almost this magnum opus Fourth innings chase, another 100. Is he as good as Tendulkar? Yeah, probably is. I think we just have to say that. Tendulkar's quite old now, isn't he? I don't think he'd be able to do what Root's doing. The other thing, I might be interested to start with this because it will actually lead into some second test chat. Was it sounded like the Grandhomme injury actually had quite a big impact on the game in terms of the fatigue put through the rest of the Kiwi bowlers and the fact that kind of Ajaz Patel seemed to be basically unusable. So I suppose my hypotheses are that the pitch probably wasn't great but flattened out a bit, that Matt Potts was quite good and he's now the answer. And that the Grandhomme being injured for New Zealand presents a problem.
Yeah. Where should we start? We'll start with we'll get the pitch out of the way, I suppose. It moved a lot, particularly in the air, and there was a bit of movement off the pitch, but you'd expect that. And also it's Lords, you've got a big old slope, so it does jag
there
around.
There is a hill, yeah.
Jag around a bit. It wasn't, I don't think it was terrible the first couple of days. The batting was bad. The batting, yeah. I mean, there was some good bowling. Both sides bowled well, but I mean, there was poor batting, and it definitely got easier on the next couple of days. Sort of the sun came out and it flattened out. As
look up, say. Not down.
Yeah, but I think it was a combination of probably helpful English conditions to start with, and then you could maybe argue that the pitch was sort of like 1 day back from where it should be, because you sort of expect a day of, especially at Lord's, day or at least half a day of it being a bit tricky. But once you get through it, it's easier to bat, and that maybe lasted longer than normal. But we shouldn't have seen 17 wickets fall on day one. That was largely the preserve of the batting, I think. Matt Potts, I mean, he was good. For a lot of people, it's the first time we've seen him play. He's played for Durham. Hasn't played a huge number of times for Durham, but he's averaging like 18 in the county championship this year. So yeah, coming in off good form, and he looked good. He looked dangerous, but he did look like a dangerous English bowler. It was just one game, so obviously we don't really know what he's going to be like in a different conditions. So we won't get that knowledge until we actually see him play in those conditions. But you can only do what's asked of you in the conditions that you've got, and he did those well. So it's a promising sign. But probably another one of those guys who's going to be really good at home, and then whether he can do the business in that sort of period where where Daryl Mitchell and Blunder were batting, and we looked pretty bereft of ideas, and we went back to Ben Stokes bowling short balls for a bit, trying to get someone caught on the boundary. In that period, it all looked very much the same as it had done. So
that's good though, Max, isn't it? Because in sport you want evolution, not revolution. You want to keep some of the bad ideas just so that everyone feels safe.
Well, I mean, it's true. We should probably, temper that by saying England do have 9 bowlers injured. So
yes,
they're missing quite a few people who would be quite useful in that.
Where does Matt Potts come in? So we saw Fisher and we saw Mahmood, and I think we said they'd probably be down. Like in one of the tests in West Indies, who were like, that's like England's 3rd best seam attack.
Yeah.
Where does Matt Potts, in your mind, rank? If we say that Archer, Anderson, Broad, for instance, or Archer, Anderson, Robinson is your top 3.
I think he's sort of a backup Ollie Robinson. That would be my thought. He was
might be in the second 11.
Yeah, maybe sort of between the second and third, sort of around that kind of Mahmood kind of thing. He, from what I could see, he's not necessarily your sort of classic swing bowler that Anderson and Broad are. He's a bit more like a bit more like Robinson, trying to hit that difficult length, get a bit off the pitch. That kind of bowler.
He's tall, isn't he?
Yeah, and again, high release point. And he and to use another one of those excellent cricketing cliches that doesn't seem to mean much until you get down the other end, is that he bowls a heavy ball. So they say, but he looks like a good player. But I think sort of that kind of Robinson understudy, perhaps.
Cool. And then the Grandhomme, from the New Zealand point of view, he ran himself out in hilarious circumstances. But that
you saw that, I assume.
Later on, and I thought potentially more pivotal to the outcome of the match was the injury. So New Zealand, Jameson destroyed England's top order. They're like 1 wicket away from wrapping up the match. He actually did. He bowled Stokes, didn't he? Off a no ball.
He did, yeah.
Maybe his worst day in cricket ever. The run out for a golden duck. No ball, bowled the skipper who gets 50 after you do that, and then the injury. After the injury, there was like a huge workload of the rest of the Kiwi bowlers. Did that, you think, have an impact, or if we say Stokes, Root, and Folks are the counter argument to that? Were they just too good for New Zealand on the day?
It's an interesting one. The thing de Grandhomme, obviously he did get Stokes out off that no ball, but it was a bit of, again, it was some an interesting bit of batting from Ben Stokes that perhaps he shouldn't be tempted to repeat in future. De Grandhomme, what he would have been really useful for is tying an end up in the way that the spinner wouldn't have been able to do. Like you mentioned, Ajaz Patel not really being usable, and Ben Stokes did take an immediate liking to him. When any time he bowled full, it was deposited into the stands. So that, yeah, you're right. I mean, that probably did lose them one option with the ball. I don't know how much they were planning to use Ajaz Patel, but they certainly didn't after that. And I guess without de Grandhomme, they needed to use him, and the fact they couldn't did mean, perhaps not in terms of being able to get the wickets. So I guess what I'm trying to say is that not having de Grandhomme doesn't necessarily mean that they would have been more likely to get Root and Folks and Stokes out. And they looked, Root in particular looked supreme and untroubled for most of that time, batted brilliantly, and are probably 75-80% of the reason England made it. But there would have probably been more pressure had de Grandhomme been on. I think he would have probably been able to keep things a bit tighter. England, for some reason, really do struggle against Colin de Grandhomme. We've seen it in memorable circumstances in the past. And again, like of the 3 overs he bowled, I think he went for 3 runs. Like he is very difficult to get away. And that could have
really low economy in general, 2.3, I think, in tests. So
and with that, it might have got New Zealand to a point where they would have had the second new ball available with England still needing runs. Because it was about 75 overs in the end, England chased it down in. And, if you add another 10 to that, suddenly things could get a little bit dicey. We saw England use that second new ball to great effect to dismiss New Zealand in their second innings after the 2 guys at the crease looked completely untroubled. And if, you swing things around, that really could have put some serious pressure on England in that final chase with the long tail they had. So it's a concern for them, and it upsets the balance of their side for the second test, of course, as well.
Yeah, well, they bowled 79 overs just about, and 73 of them were bowled by Tim Southey, Bolt, and Jameson. That's a lot of work. One of them is bowling at all times.
Well, what it might...
I know in the first innings, they bowled 14, 15 and 6 overs or something like that. They didn't really get to an awful lot. But
it's on the hoof, isn't it? Without having really a chance to rest.
Yeah, you've got to think one of them going. That's pretty tough going. That's pretty tough going.
And I think maybe not in terms of the last game, but it might affect them for this game coming up, because
possibly, yeah,
they might have to bring in Wagner,
the German composer.
Yeah.
That was the final question I had was did New Zealand get it really badly wrong not picking him and picking Ajaz Patel? I know Ajaz Patel, I think, what is it? Is it 4 tests since he took 10 wickets and he's bowled 2 overs in that time and been dropped twice or something like that?
He's been a little unfortunate. I don't think it was wrong. I mean, England went with the left arm spinner. You know what England are like playing spin. I think, and with the slope, you could get one to go straight on. We all know what England are like when it comes to batting against left-arm spinners who don't necessarily turn the ball extravagantly. I don't think that I have a problem with them having picked Ajaz Patel. I think he's been a little unlucky in how it's gone, but not having de Grandhomme really did stifle them, and I don't think we'll be seeing Ajaz Patel in the second test.
No, I'd be a little bit surprised by that. As as well. To be honest, it moves us on quite nicely though. We'll talk about New Zealand in a second, Max. I reckon. Let's do England first because we actually do know their team. So the big news, well, I don't know if it's big news. The news, the medium-sized news.
Yeah,
Jack Leach returns. I don't know. Did you return? Stays in the. They've been reporting it as stays
unchanged.
In the team,
Yeah,
but he wasn't in the team like 4 days ago. So
yeah, he wasn't in
I
the
don't know
team
where
for
I can-
98% of the Test match.
Yeah. Anyway, he's back in, or he's in, stays in. Yeah, I think we've got the point across now. Crawley, Lease, Pope, Root, Bairstow, Stokes, Folks, Potts, Leach, Broad, Anderson. That is an unchanged 11 or an 11 with one change. Get to go back to that. What are your thoughts on that? Is this an all-conquering super group? Are England great again? And is this the 11 to take us into the future?
Well, I think the theme of when I reviewed the last Test with Ross was that it's more of a kind of meet the New England, same as the old England.
Yeah.
And that, their bowling's dangerous and they can't bat. But you can't just change things around immediately. They won the Test. I have no issue with them keeping the same players. It's probably quite annoying if your name is Harry Brook that you've been taken out of your side to go and carry some drinks for the England team when the blast is going on, and he had a good start to the blast. He could have been carrying on, but no, he's going to be just as he's going to be around the England squad to, enjoy the atmosphere, as they so often like to say, is a benefit of bringing people along and not playing them. So it's unfortunate for him, but to take Ollie Pope out after one game where most of the batters failed twice, or at some point, it would be a little harsh on him, especially given it was his first attempt at batting three in a game of red ball cricket, or first class cricket anyway. So I don't really have an issue with an unchanged side, but I don't know if we'll end up with the same side when it comes to the next series.
Yeah, I think that's probably fair. If we need a siren or something, big Test alert, like who's under the radar? Do you want under the microscope on the radar? Is if you're not in the team, then you could be on the radar. If you're in the team, then you're under the microscope.
Yeah, and just Jack Leach was both, of course.
Yeah, who do you think the players are in that 11 that need to do a thing quite soon?
I think Alex Lees needs to score some runs, get to some sort of milestone. He was praised by Ben Stokes for looking the best he'd done in an England shirt, and he scored 20 in the second innings. And he did look quite nice. He played some nice cover drives, looked a bit more fluent, and it was promising that he might be able to actually up the scoring rate. But he does need to do something, because obviously Dom Sibley was dropped for similar reasons, in that he couldn't get the scoring rate going, and he has apparently been working quite hard on trying to change that, and he had a decent start to the season. So he will be on the radar while Alex Lees is under the microscope. And then, Ollie Pope is going to be permanently in that position until he goes and does something as well, because again, he had another start to the county championship where he bashed bowlers around for fun. I think he was at least batting at 4, so he was a little higher up the order than just batting at 6 and soaking up the oval sunshine. But he obviously needs to do something. I think they'll give him a bit of a chance at number 3 to do that, but he will need to repay that with some runs, with people waiting in the wings. But then you get the question, who comes in there? Because Harry Brook's probably not going to come in at number 3. You've got Josh Bohannon perhaps, but he didn't get a look in. So I think they're the two main ones for me.
Yeah, I think I probably agree with you on that. I think at least there's probably a couple of caveats to both, aren't there? Like, Lease has only been in the team for 4 tests. Yeah. I think everyone's made a big song and dance about giving people a chance, and because it's the reset, I think they'll give people their first chance will start again, if that makes sense. So I think they'll forget that he didn't do anything in the West Indies and be like, okay, well, let's see what he dodoes for at least the series here.
And a Durham boy, of course, so he's got that in his locker.
Yeah, and when I say under the microscope, not fully, they've not zoomed in.
Yeah. They've just been added to the
they're in the
what's it
petri
called?
dish.
Yeah,
They're in the
little
petri dish, but there's no
glass
scientist
bit.
looking at the team.
I do love a confused metaphor.
I quite like the format of England's top order, though, especially at home. I think away they might want to revisit it slightly and go for a little bit more resilience over dash. But if we're set for a summer of pitches and balls that are like Lords, last year it was quite flat in England. I thought, I'm not, by English standards, it wasn't flat by any stretch. But if the first test of the series of the season is an indicator of what we should expect over the next 6, then I think having 2 dashers and 1 anchor, to use the T20 parlance, sort of makes sense from an England point of view, because 30 or 40 balls in one of those 250-a-side tests actually can change the game quite quickly and really take the pressure off Root or Bairstow, get rid of that third slip earlier than may otherwise happen. And I don't mind, for that reason, Ollie Pope at number 3, particularly in England. I'm not sure away from home where the new ball, sort of matters more. I mean, like the new ball does more in England, but it stays kind of doing more for a longer time. Away from home, when like the first 15 overs are kind of crucial, I don't know if you want somebody that will get out quite cheaply, probably fairly regularly in that position. 30 or 40 in Australia's, it's nice, but it's not. It's going to be quite often quite irrelevant to your team's overall score. But I think in England, Crawley and Pope playing with abandon actually isn't necessarily too much of a problem.
It's interesting. That's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it, to what you'd say about having Crawley opening, in that he's liable to nick off playing a booming driver.
Well, I mean, I think you're sort of budgeting in that you're factoring in that Crawley and Pope are going to nick off or get bowled
at some point,
at some point. But by having 2 of them in the team, 2 dashes in the team, you should quite regularly get decent starts. You're not going to batter teams into submission by any stretch, but like I think the problem with the Burns-Sibley combo, although I'd probably still have them down as England's 2 best opening batters, if that makes sense, is that they both score so slowly that you're quite regularly going to be in situations where, even though they've managed to bat for 20 overs, England are on like 28 for 2.
Yeah.
And if that had happened in Pakistan on one of those roads they played that series against Australia in, you're all right. Okay, Joe Root's in and he's going to score 7,000 runs now. But in England, you're the currency of runs, because because the games are sort of sped up. Runs are really what you're going for. Rather, I think the tactic of survival is less useful.
It's an uphill battle.
Apart from, like, I mean, obviously in Test cricket, you get loads of different contextual situations where you're batting for the draw, or you're expecting no rain, or you're playing on a you're playing at the Oval or something like that. Then maybe there's a horses for courses argument. But if you're playing at Lords, I don't actually really have a problem with having 2 guys that, they might snick off, but they might also score a decent amount of runs quite quickly and put the other team in a pretty difficult situation. And I think Crawley in the first innings sort of did that, didn't he?
Yeah.
Well, he got 40 quite quickly.
He did,
40 or 60 maybe. And people were like, "Oh, now he's out and it's the end of the world." And it was like, yeah, but England are 90 for 2 here. Like,
well, if he scores, if he does that in every test, he scores 40 and he averages 40. That's good.
Yeah, in a low-scoring match, he's almost got England to a situation of parity, and they've still got their entire middle order to come. Now, in the event, England did in England, didn't they? And completely blew the advantage that he'd given them. But I'm prepared to see Crawley and Pope bat through the summer and see if it works. I think in those 2 roles, I'd go that far. And then if it doesn't work for either of them, then they're out of the team for a while. I'd probably see Sibley back in for Leeds, though. I think he's just got more potential to do that grittier opener role or to do that better. But yeah, as an 11, it's not one of the horror shows that we've seen recently. Jack Leach, he stays in the team. Does he need to do anything to keep Parkinson at bay?
Not get concussed. Okay. Mainly, I think he's probably still quite far ahead of Parkinson in terms of the England opinion. The wider opinion, the public opinion, is probably quite different to that. But for Jack Leach, I think they probably value an ability to hold an end up and keep things tight, which you tend to have more with the finger spinner than the leg spinner. England obviously feel that, especially in the past, they've been burned a bit with leg spinners who can be a bit leaky. And I think they're probably looking more for something like control in, especially somewhere like England rather than overseas. So I think Jack Leach probably is ahead from that point of view. And again, like, how much are you going to even be used?
Not much. It's at Trent Bridge.
So.
We'll talk about Trent Bridge in a minute, maybe. But there was some data on this going around in the county championship where they both played a fair amount. 81% of Leach's balls are on a good length, and 72% of Parkinson's are. So, and that actually, by the way, is not because Parkinson is a leg spinner and therefore more dangerous. That differential not necessarily a huge problem for Parkinson because his good balls are going to be so much better than Leach's. I think. I know that in cricket, a leg spinner on a good line and a good length is the most dangerous delivery. I don't know. I think there's probably. I mean, this is one of those things. I didn't see any Parkinson bowl. I've seen him bowl a little bit on streams in the county championship. I didn't see him bowl at all at Lords. People said he wasn't really spinning the ball too much.
No, it wasn't a huge amount.
Pick up one wicket. I don't know. I still feel like he might be worth the gamble. I feel like we might have seen Leach, but perhaps you don't want to completely. Well, I say completely. Maybe you want. Well, whichever way you frame it, Leach is a more experienced international bowler, and he's not a bad international bowler. He has pretty good numbers over 21 tests now, or whatever it is. Yeah. So, maybe you trust him, and that's not a problem. At Trent Bridge, usually benefits the pacers. Let's talk about New Zealand. You said you think they might abandon Ajaz Patel.
Yeah.
Here's my question for you. I assume they bring in Neil Wagner and they go 4 pacers. Do they need to make another change somewhere to bring in another bowler, or is Daryl Mitchell just going to be the guy who sends down a few, or we see Kane turn his arm over? Or are they just going to be a 4 bowler attack?
I think they might bring in Michael Bracewell for de Grandon.
Okay. What do you know about Michael Bracewell?
He can offer some part-time off. Well, he's an off-spinning all-rounder. I think part-time might be a little harsh. He's an all-rounder who can bowl some off-spin. And given the lack of use of Ajaz Patel in the last game and the lack of likelihood of needing to use a spinner at Trent Bridge, I think they'll probably go down that route for an extra bowler, and then it'll be Wagner in for Patel, and then they'll have that 4-seam attack with the off-spin if they need it, and they've still got the all-rounder in Bracewell to come in for de Grandon. That's what I expect they'll do, because Bracewell's been around as well, the side, and then to come into the squad. So I think he should be ready to play. That's what I would do. I don't know if that's what they will do.
That'll be a debut for him. Yeah, I was
also Henry Nicholls might be fit. That was the other thing.
Oh yes. Okay. So who would he come in for? Will Young?
I think he'd probably come in. Yeah. Well, I think probably come in for. He could come in for Will Young, and they could open with Conway.
Yeah,
which would make sense given that that's where he started and did really well, and then they bailed him back for. And I think was it Blundell came in to replace him and did really well with his 90. So it would be very harsh to drop him.
We'll so a couple of changes that we could expect from New Zealand. I saw nearly knocked my microphone off its stand there. I saw an interview with Jameson talking to the press saying that New Zealand weren't going to panic and they still believe in the process and all of that. They haven't been good or great anyway for a year.
Basically, since they won the World Test Championship.
Yes, they win the World Test Championship and they beat England pretty comfortably last year. And then they've lost a test at home, haven't they, to Bangladesh? And they lose somewhere else as well. They went to India. And actually, they lost 1-0, but you got a draw in India against, Ashwin and Akshar Patel on unfavourable pitches, probably if you're a New Zealand batter, which is reasonably creditable. Would you be panicking?
I don't think so. There's not a huge amount different from what they were doing right in the first place. I think, personnel-wise, BJ Watling and Ross Taylor have retired, so they've got to come in and find some replacements for them. But they've got a reasonable amount of batting. I think they're just going through a period where people are lacking a bit of form, and maybe they also have a slight balance problem like England do with Jameson batting number 8. He's probably not quite good enough for a number 8, is he? Which kind of lengthens the tail.
I disagree with that. I thought Jameson might be so. I thought they could go for a really avant-garde batting lineup and move Jameson up to 7.
Oh yeah.
I mean,
that's risky.
Yeah, I mean, we haven't really got a lot to go on in terms of Jameson batting, but he's shown a degree of competency, mainly really in white ball cricket. Looking at his numbers, I've just got them up. So the 7 would probably be too high. First class average of just a shade under 20. But I think I'd have Jameson down as a very competent number 8.
Yeah.
But maybe not an Ashwin. Certainly not an Ashwin. I don't think he's going to get 4 Test centuries in his career. Not a Jason Holder. Definitely not a Jason Holder. But
serviceable.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say Wokes, but probably not a Wokes either. But England would love him at number 8. I think is what I'm saying. I think he'd be a big upgrade. I think he's probably going to be an interesting one, isn't he? Where I don't think he's ever going to be the guy you rely on to bat for any extended period of time.
It'll be old school broad number 8.
Yeah, but he's capable of scoring runs. I wouldn't be stunned if his Test average at the end of his career was in the mid-20s. Stands at 21 right now, which is decent. Strike rate of 60. So yeah, a bit of a biffer. And then what they got after that? Bolt, Wagner, and Southey. I mean,
it's no need to panic there.
Yeah.
Not good with the bat, but with the ball.
Oh, yeah. No, that's a pretty good lineup. Is Matt Henry in the squad, or is he injured or not about?
Let me check.
Put you on the spot.
I did have this information on in front of me, and it's now not there, which is somewhat annoying.
Sorry about that.
But I did. Matt Henry's been an unlucky man, hasn't he? He is in the squad, but
yeah, I did wonder whether they'd think about bringing him in for potentially Southey as a little bit of a rotation option, or Jameson as well. I think
he's one of those guys that every time he's come into the side, he's done pretty well.
He's done okay. I mean, I think he's done better recently. But initially he came into the side and maybe was slightly underwhelming. He's had Test average of 38 actually, but I think more recently he has been sort of decently effective. Looking here, he got a few wickets, didn't he, in his last Test against South Africa? 5 wickets, across both innings, although a little bit expensive. The reason I thought he might come in, though, to be honest, was that he's got a fair amount of experience bowling for, I think, Kent, hasn't he, in England, and we've seen, notably, I think here, probably thinking of Peter Siddle in the Ashes a couple of 3 years ago now. We've seen other teams use that quite effectively, like an England specialist to come in and destroy the rotation. Well, not destroy necessarily, but be a rotation option that will be useful. It's like Siddle when he played in that 2019 Ashes. I think most Australian pundits would have been like, "This guy's past it. Why are we picking him?" But because he had this experience, 3 years playing for Essex, he could hold the fort reasonably well, and actually kind of kept Stark out of the team, didn't he?
He was really good at that.
He was good, yeah. So I think there's a possibility that they might consider that, and it might not be the worst idea in the world. But we shall see. Do you think New Zealand have enough to come back and beat England?
Oh, absolutely. They've got good bowl. They've got the bowling to trouble England. It's all it's down to England's batting lineup is once again still reliant quite heavily on Joe Root, and to a smaller extent maybe Ben Stokes and Bairstow to dig them out of holes. And their top order is good. They just need to get back to seeing the ball properly. Conway, we saw what he could do in his first test. He's fallen off since, but that's how it is. Kane Williamson is not Kane Williamson, but as soon as he finds some form of the Kane Williamson of old, suddenly you're looking at a side with pretty decent prospects. So I think they've definitely got enough to turn it around, but they will have to really improve on their individual performances because their form is not good at the moment, and England will be riding high, won't they, after their win? So it'll be
oh yeah, absolutely, yeah,
an interesting one to see.
I mean, looking at, I thought for that test, New Zealand were basically the better team until Joe Root decided they weren't.
Yeah.
And that happened. That does happen. That's sort of, Joe Root is an all-time great. Certainly, I think England's. Well, he's on the podium at least for best English batter ever. And in cricket, if you come up against somebody that talented and they have a day, quite often there's not really actually that much you can do about it. The skill gap just ends up being too good, and folks and etc. sort of hung around to give him the stage. I mean, like that innings, I'm getting the numbers up again. He scored 115. I know at the end he hit all those boundaries to slightly improve the stats, but strikes at 67 against a decent attack, albeit maybe slightly tiring on the fourth morning. I'd still, if I was England, be worried. I'd have that match reasonably finely balanced. I do think from listening to it from afar, that England sound a bit more organised, a bit more composed, like they've got a little bit more of a plan than this time 6 months ago, or even 3 months ago. But there's still some reasonably
still largely the same players and the same issues.
Brittle parts of that batting order, yeah. And still arguably, and maybe this is a bit more arguable, still a little bit maybe of a one-dimensional bowling attack in England.
I think it's probably fair.
I think in England they've got more than one dimension because the pitch will seam and swing, and they've got bowlers who can swing it and seam it. But Trent Bridge can be really good for batting, and if it does go a bit flat and the ball doesn't swing, you get a dud. Maybe it will be hard work. Max, anything else, or should we wrap up the show?
I can't think of anything.
Perfect. Well, final reminder, head over to patreon.com/thecricketpod to support the show directly. Every little helps on that front, keeps us in business, producing content for you. Thank you to the guy from the airport. That was good. And we're on Twitter and Instagram @thecricketpod. Like, subscribe, etc. And we'll be back with some content through the test. I'm not sure we quite nailed down the schedule. We'll definitely do a wrap up. We might do a post days play one if we can get things together. Ross is off on holiday now, so that's a little bit awkward. And so are a lot of like the regular guests that we have on. So it's can be a bit tricky, but we'll be back in the next few days.
We'll soldier on gamely.
Keep an eye out. Goodbye, Max.
Goodbye.
You're listening to the Cricket Podcast.